it's a two-part question. And first is that, is there anything that the collective citizenry, if we were to stand up, would have as a legal roadblock to the implementation of this so-called cleanup plan that is being proposed? What's within our grasp legally to stop this? And on the flip side, were we to ever manage to get a true cleanup, what do we need to ask for to be sure that the cleanup is not so unbelievably contaminating to our environment as we extract those horrendous things from the lake?
In terms of legally what's available to you, Congress built a very odd provision into the federal Superfund law, which basically prohibits anybody from suing to challenge a remedy once it's been chosen by EPA until after the remedy is implemented. Now, without going into the history of why that provision is in there and so forth, you know, it does provide a pretty solid bar to actually filing a lawsuit to challenge the remedy. But that's not to say that the remedy can't be changed. And remedies have been changed in other situations. But those changes came about as a result of the political process. EPA and DEC have the authority to go back and change a remedy. Once it's been selected, they can go back and change the record of decision and say, on second thought, we want to change this remedy. And as a matter of fact, they're in the process of doing that right now with regard to one component of the remedy, which involves the construction of a barrier wall in the lake and the filling in of the lake behind the barrier wall, which is different from the original chosen remedy, which was to actually dredge the contaminated sediments. They're going to just leave them in there and then try to pump them out behind this wall that's going to require filling in part of the lake. But that's really the avenue to pursue, is the political avenue to put pressure on the regulators to go back and reevaluate the remedy that they've chosen and to amend the record of decision and change the remedy.
Very simply, monitoring. Monitoring of the removal of the contaminants, both air and water and sediment, before and after the process and during the removal.
I have a couple questions, actually. First, to those of you who've studied the plan itself extensively, you know, looking at the lake bottom cleanup plan and looking at the plan for, you know, sewage treatment and the amended consent, or the ACJ, et cetera, do you think that, you know, is there, as things stand right now, the possibility of a recovery for a cold water fishery? And then my other question for Mr. Carter would be, you know, one of the things that became very apparent, at least to me this evening, was that, you know, here we're looking at, you know, we have the Onondaga Environmental Institute in conjunction with ESF and others, you know, including the Onondaga Lake Partnership, who are going through these entire visioning steps to get all of this feedback and all of this input from the community. Yet, just last week, we signed, or not we, but, you know, our representatives in government signed the deal that's going to essentially lay out what happens with this lake. So it seems like there's quite the juxtaposition there. Is this something that happens in other communities? Is there a way to work around this? You know, with your background in urban planning, you know, where do you see us going from here?
I'm an optimist. I believe a cold water fishery can be constructed. We have cold water fisheries all around us. There are cold water fish in Onondaga Creek in the southern stream reaches. There's cold water fish in 9 Mile Creek, and the nutrient issues that could help restore the oxygen to the system is solvable. And we've seen good improvement in the last 10 years. I was mentored by a fellow named Robert Hennigan, who actually coined the phrase Salmon 2000. And I was present the night that he made that statement, and I was working late in the office, and he came back in, and he didn't know I was there, and he was ranting and raving at his desk, literally pulling his hair out, saying, he knew he was in trouble when he said 2000. But if he were here tonight, and Robin and Chief Powless and Jeanne have all pointed to the fact that time isn't as linear as we think, and that the reconstruction of a coldwater fishery, and in particular sturgeon and salmon and potentially eel, isn't that far off. And, you know, again, I'm an internal optimist. And I just want to say one other comment about that two-word phrase, Salmon 2000. It really wasn't the salmon. It's a euphemism for all the conditions that have to be right. But coldwater fish are an indicator of clean water, cold water, the right temperature, the right pH. They're an indicator of the right type of habitat and wetland conditions for reproductive. And the lake itself can be a corridor of the larger system. We have healthy Finger Lakes and coldwater fish. We have the Lake Ontario Basin to work from. So anyways, the good news is the water quality conditions are there. We need to work on the habitat and chemical conditions. And the other good news about a coldwater fishery is they are migratory. And so they don't have to stay in a place for a long period of time that deals with or contains large amounts of contaminants. And so you can get a healthy, edible coldwater fishery in a large system.
Before Professor Carter answers the second part of your question, I wanted to make sure the creek revitalization visioning process is not the same as the lake visioning process. There's about 3 of these going on to say, please don't confuse those, even though they are confusing. You know, we have an ideal, I think, a very good process going on for the creek revitalization, not to be confused with any of the, quote, lake planning work.
Yeah, to deal with the planning question, it's this is a community and a region that has a lot of not-for-profits doing a lot of heroic work. That's very good news. It's also symptomatic of the fact that government isn't doing what it needs to do. Under the best of circumstances, what not-for-profits do is they stimulate government by generating ideas, rallying ideas, bringing things to the table, and you have a follow-up. In the case study I talked about in this morning's workshop, the condition of the city I was talking about was initiated by, in fact, a not-for-profit, which did its work so well that they became a quasi-governmental organization as they got partly co-opted into the city. They still retain their independent board of directors. But what's important is that the mayor and the council and the departments and the department heads took up those ideas and they made things happen. One of the problems with having not-for-profits carry the weight is they can't give you the legal permission to do things. They don't own the land. They don't have enough budget to make things happen and to make them happen in a summary way if they wish to. So the fact that a lot of the load regarding the Onondaga watershed is still being carried by not-for-profits and by citizens is symptomatic of the fact that we're being let down by our government decision makers and by the staffs that they hire. Those people by now should be in the lead. Okay, in the best communities, actually, the best jobs are actually to work for the municipal departments. It's where the creative thinking happens, and it's where you make things happen. And that's not happening here is a problem. We don't hear those voices. We don't hear the city. We don't hear the county. We don't hear the towns and the villages saying the right kinds of things about how we can move forward. They think somebody else is going to take care of this. And in that case, you have then an absence of citizenship and an absence of leadership.
One of the things, perhaps for Mr. Amato, when you're talking about not any, having us any legal recourse at this point, one of the things that astonished me, when there was a comment period, I don't remember the name of the document, but was proposed remedies or whatever for cleanup, and they had an executive summary, they had a short form or whatever, that people could read and then comment on. And so I picked up one of these, and I read through it. I don't remember, it was 40 pages, or I don't remember how long it was. But what astonished me, and I can't get over this, and I don't know how many people in the room, read those documents to comment upon it, is that after they went through this long history of, you know, how all the industries and what they'd done and all the junk they poured into the lake, and then they went into all the terrible chemicals that were there and the effects that were there, and then they talked about their, I don't remember the scientific terms, the FEQs and the, you know, whatever, the levels that they were going to aim for. They went through this whole thing and probably hoping to put anyone to sleep. But then they got down to the nitty-gritty, and they said they looked at about 7 potential cleanup solutions, and they went through each one of those. And one of them, I think number 7, and there were probably more, but there were only 7 in this document. Number 7 was a much more extensive cleanup, actually digging up the stuff and getting it out of there than all of the other solutions. And they went through and they analyzed each one of these solutions, their proposals, as to how well it was going to meet their whatever it was, the swimmable FEQs or the levels of the things. And what astonished me is that their own document said that solution number 7 would have met all of the goals much better than any of the other things they came up with. Nevertheless, the DEC was not going to recommend number 7 because it was going to cost Honeywell too much money. And that astonished me, and I didn't see it addressed in the press. I didn't see it addressed anywhere. And that's what got me, was their own document. They admitted very clearly in that document that the solution they were choosing was not the best solution, but it was going to be the one that wasn't going to cost Honeywell as much money. They decided it was too expensive for Honeywell to pay for. And I guess maybe what I'm asking is, if this is a fact that we're known, wouldn't this, shouldn't people be enraged about this? This is our DEC. I've had dealings with the DEC. I call them the Department of Eternal Consternation, but, or economic, whatever. But this is our Department of Environmental Conservation. They're admitting in their own document that this isn't the best way to do it. They're admitting, they're picking the solution because they don't want to cost an industry too much money. Isn't there, isn't there any
the
legal?
answer that the agencies give is that they're required under the applicable statutes to pick a remedy that's, quote, cost effective. And basically they use that to justify picking remedies that are not going to cost the polluter that much money. The problem is that what we find, particularly with Onondaga Lake, is that they are focusing on the cost part of that, but the effective part of it is getting ignored. And that's where the problem comes in, is the application of the cost effectiveness requirement is, again, skewed because of what the frame of reference is. It's part of the normal process for these sites to be handled in this way. Cap it. Put a cap over it. And it's becoming more and more common for the regulating agencies to choose those types of remedies under the rubric of it being cost effective. Simply stated, it's not effective. It's leaving behind enormous amounts of contamination, and it's relying on a system that is, certain to fail at some point.
But that's what I mean. Isn't there a way for us to challenge our DEC on this when, their own documents?
Well, through the political process, again,
That's it.
because they are insulated, the choice of remedy is insulated by law from being challenged until after it's already been implemented.
So we have to ask Mr. Spitzer then.
I know that there are several people in line, but we really need to end here in order to have time for the closing Thanksgiving address. I want to thank everyone for coming out, and particularly all those who've been part of this last night and all day today. I guess if there's one takeaway message that I got anyway, certainly from listening to Brad, but I think that we know this, that if we decide that this is home, that we make that kind of commitment to it, that we decide that we are in this for the long haul, and this is our home. And if we do the right things, there's plenty of time to make this happen, to make Onondaga Lake whole and healthy again. It's not hopeless, although it may look that way sometimes. And that taking that first step and making that commitment, if we can bring back Onondaga Lake, then there's nothing on this planet we can't do.